Okay, this is our video example of how to solve a system using elimination. I want you to keep in mind when you're working on problems like this that you could solve this one using substitution and you would get the correct answer and it would all be fine. So it's important that you know how to do both substitution and elimination depending on what you're asked to do. So for this one, we are going to solve it using elimination. The first thing we need to do is stack the equations and make sure that the letters are lined up with each other. And if I just tried to stack them the way they are now, the x's don't match up and the y's don't match up. So we're forced to have to rewrite this whole equation. So we are about to write them in the same order as one another. The first line I can just leave the way it is. But for the second line, I have to change the order of the x term and the y term. When you change the order, the sign travels with the number. So this minus sign belongs with the 6x. And the only way that it would ever turn into a plus is if it moved across the equal sign. And we're not doing that. All we're doing is changing the order of the two things that are on the left. So the negative 6x is going to come first. And the 3y is actually a positive 3y, even though we don't write it up there. So we'll end up being 6x plus 3y is equal to negative 12. All we did was make sure that when we stacked them, the x was with the x, the y was with the y, the equal was with the equal, and the two numbers were together. So we need to make sure that they're matched up before we do anything. Then we are going to make a decision. Should we add or subtract the two equations together? So we make that decision based on attempting to eliminate one of the two letters. The letter that is easier to eliminate here is the x, because they both have a 6 in front of them, and in fact they both have a negative 6 in front of them. So in order to get rid of them, we are going to subtract the second equation from the first equation. So we write that over here, and we put brackets around the whole second equation. So we're going to subtract everything in the second equation from everything in the first equation. Just to review why we chose subtraction, if we added together negative 6x plus negative 6x, we would actually end up with negative 12x. But if we subtract, we end up with 0, which is what we wanted. So make sure you take your time at that step, because if you pick the wrong plus or minus there, it will mess up the entire rest of the equation. So now we're going to eliminate that variable. So the 6x minus negative 6x gives us 0, and 6 minus 3y, so 6y minus 3y gives us 3y. And 6 minus negative 12 gives us 18. That's also a tricky spot. You have to remember that minus sign that's in front of the brackets for every single term. So we did 6y minus 3y and 6 minus negative 12. Okay, so we've got 3y equals 18. We're not doing this as part of our big steps, so we're just going to keep going in the same sheet of paper. So we're going to continue with this question. The next step is to actually solve for the variable. So we have 3y equals 18. We know from previous units that our strategy is to isolate the variable by using inverse operations. We end up with y equals 6. We are halfway to finding the point of intersection. We don't know the x-coordinate, but we do know the y-coordinate is positive 6. So now we're going to take that 6, and we can choose any of the original equations to sub it into. So the hint was to choose the easier one, but there's not always one that's easier than the other. So just take one of your originals. I usually just choose the first one. So we're going to plug it into the first equation. So I will rewrite the first equation and replace y with 6. And then we're just going to keep going until we get an actual answer for x. once we eventually figure out that x is equal to 5, we make sure we come back and write the point of intersection is whatever x we got and whatever y we got. So I don't want anybody to miss that mark on an assessment. Make sure you go ahead and say that last piece of information.